What happens when a family assumes the widower will just step aside? How does a routine inheritance meeting turn into a reckoning? I stayed quiet when my daughter-in-law announced she would run everything, but she didn't know what I had already arranged. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Martin Hale, and 3 weeks ago, I buried my wife. The first night alone in our house did not feel real. I walked in after the funeral and reception, still in my dark suit, tie crooked, collar too tight. The place was too quiet. The clock in the hallway was the only thing making noise, ticking like it had somewhere more important to be. Her things were everywhere. Her cardigan on the back of the armchair, the reading glasses she always left on the side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle with her neat handwriting filling most of the boxes. For a long time, I just stood in the doorway and looked at the dent in the cushion where she used to sit. Everyone had told me the usual things that day. They said she was in a better place. They said I was strong. They said I should lean on family now. I nodded because that was easier than explaining that none of those words made the bed feel less empty. The house smelled faintly of her lavender detergent. When I stepped into the kitchen, the light over the sink flickered. I made myself a cup of instant coffee I did not want. Habit more than comfort. I stared at the empty chair across from me. She used to sit there tapping her spoon on the mug while she told me about some neighbor's drama or a funny thing she had seen in town. There was no voice now, only the hum of the refrigerator and the weight in my chest. My son Trevor had told me earlier that week that he and his wife Brianna wanted to have me over for dinner soon. He said they needed to go over some things. He said it in that careful voice people use around old men in grief, like I might break if anyone spoke too loudly. The next evening, I drove to their house anyway. I told myself it was good that they wanted to help. My grip on the steering wheel said something different. Trevor's house was newer than mine, with white walls and furniture that looked like it had come straight from a catalog. When I walked in, I noticed there was not a single photo of me or my late wife on the entry table. Only pictures of Trevor and Brianna on vacations and one of Brianna accepting some work award. Trevor greeted me with a quick hug and said that it was good I made it. His eyes slid away too soon. Brianna came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She leaned in and gave me a light air kiss near my cheek, then pulled back before I could react. She said she was sorry for my loss, like she was reading from a script. We sat down at the dining table. It was covered in perfectly arranged plates and candles that smelled like vanilla. Brianna had cooked some kind of pasta with sauce I could not name. I ate because I did not know what else to do. The food tasted fine, but my mouth felt numb. Trevor tried to talk about work first. He said that the new project at his firm was stressful. He added that he was working longer hours. Brianna cut in and mentioned that she had been handling most of the home stuff because he was so busy. There was a hint in her voice, something sharp under the polite words. I started to say that if they ever needed help around the house, I could come over. I had time now. She smiled at me and said that she was sure I meant well, but they had everything under control. She explained that they were at an age where they needed to make their own decisions. She said this twice. After a while, Trevor cleared his throat and said that they should probably talk about arrangements. He glanced at Brianna as he said it, like he was checking for permission. She folded her hands on the table and leaned forward. She told me that after my wife's death, there would be a lot to handle. She said that estates, properties, bank accounts, all that was complicated. She explained that grief made people confused. She added that it could be risky for someone in my situation to try to manage everything alone. I asked what she meant by someone in my situation. I kept my voice calm. She did not pause. She said that I was going through a hard time and that I was retired and older. She said that modern finances were more complex than when I was working. She used the word outdated. She explained that she and Trevor had talked and felt it made sense for them to run things from now on. Trevor stared at his plate while she spoke. She outlined her idea like a business proposal. She said that after the inheritance was sorted, it would be easier if all decisions and accounts went through them. She said they could manage the house. She added that they could handle any investments or sales. She said I would not have to worry. She used that phrase, would not have to worry, like it was a gift. I listened. I watched her talk about my life, my home, the things my wife and I had built together, as if they were items on a list. I asked, still in a quiet tone, whether she thought I was incapable of managing my own affairs. She responded that it was not about capability, it was about being efficient and sensible. She said that I did not need the stress. She added that it would be better for everyone if decisions came from a single, organized point. She meant herself. Trevor finally spoke. He said that Brianna had a better head for this stuff, that she worked with finances and planning. He said that I should let them take care of things, that it would be easier on me. He did not meet my eyes. Something in my chest shifted. Not anger, just a new kind of cold clarity. I realized then that they were not asking. They were telling me what they expected. I did not argue. I said that I understood that they had talked about it. I said that we could discuss it more after the formal inheritance meeting. Brianna frowned slightly at the word after, but she smiled again and said that was fine. She added that she was sure the meeting would go smoothly and that everyone would see her plan made sense. When I left their house, the night air felt heavy. I stood by my car for a moment, looking back at the bright windows. Inside, I could see Trevor moving around the kitchen. Brianna stood with her arms crossed, talking quickly. I could not hear the words, but I knew the tone. It was the tone of someone planning around me, not with me. On the day of the funeral, that same tone showed up again. The reception hall was crowded with people who had known my wife. There were co-workers from the school where she had worked, neighbors, old friends, and relatives. There were flowers on every table, the air thick with mixed scents. My wife's photo was on an easel near the front, her smiling face looking out over trays of food and people in dark clothes. I stood near the front for a while, shaking hands, accepting hugs. People said that my wife had been kind, that she had helped their children, that she had always smiled. I nodded because it was true. Every word hurt in a way I could not explain. After some time, the person from the venue announced that if anyone wanted to say a few words, they could. There was a quiet murmur. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. I had planned to say something small, nothing fancy, just a simple memory or two to honor her. I stepped forward. I had barely drawn breath when I heard Brianna's voice behind me. She said that she would speak on behalf of the family. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor as she moved past me. For a second, I thought she was going to stand beside me. Instead, she took the spot at the front alone. She touched my arm as she passed and said softly that it might be too much for me, that she would handle it. She did not wait for my answer. She started talking about my wife's life in the tone she used in work presentations. She said that my wife had always believed in planning for the future. She said that my wife had been practical and organized. She added that they, meaning she and Trevor, would honor that practicality moving forward. When she mentioned my name, it was to say that I was deeply affected and that they would be supporting me with important decisions. She said that everyone could relax because the family had things under control. Several pairs of eyes flicked toward me. Some looked sympathetic, some looked approving, like it was good that someone capable was in charge now. I stood there feeling like a guest at my own wife's farewell. After her speech, a few people approached me. One man said privately that it was great that my son's wife was stepping up, since I must be overwhelmed. Another person told me that it was lucky I did not have to manage the estate on my own. Each comment settled over me like another thin layer of dust. When the reception ended, I helped take down some decorations because I needed to do something with my hands. Trevor and Brianna were near the entrance, talking to a small cluster of relatives. I heard my name and stopped just out of sight. Brianna was telling them that once the inheritance was handled, she expected to manage everything. She said that it was the natural next step, given Martin's age and fragile state. She added that she already had ideas on how to use the house and assets more efficiently. No one in that group disagreed. I walked out quietly into the lobby. The noise from the hall faded behind me. The vending machines hummed softly against the wall. My shoulders felt heavy, but my mind was clearer than it had been since the hospital. On the small table by the exit, my phone lay where I had set it down earlier next to the guest book and a bowl of pens. As I reached for it, the screen lit up and the device vibrated against the wood. A new notification slid across the top. It was an email from the estate office, subject line in bold letters. Inheritance meeting, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Attendance confirmed. The next morning, the house felt even emptier. I woke up before sunrise out of habit. For 42 years, I had lived with another person's rhythm next to mine. She would always stir a little when I moved, mumble something half awake, then push me to go make coffee. Now there was just silence and the creak of the old bed frame when I sat up. I shuffled into the kitchen in my slippers. The mug she always used was still in the cabinet, the one with the chipped handle and faded flowers. I pulled it down and set it next to mine, then realized what I was doing and put it back. Small things like that hurt more than the big ones. The email from the estate office flashed in my mind. Inheritance meeting. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., attendance confirmed. I had read it 3 times the night before. The words had felt like something heavy pressed against my ribs, necessary but heavy. There was a text from my wife's sister, Margaret, waiting on my phone. She asked if I could meet her at the Riverside Cafe that afternoon. She said she wanted to talk about some family matters. I knew what that meant. No one wanted to let me grieve without also talking about paperwork. I spent the morning doing little tasks that did not need doing. I wiped down already clean counters. I organized the mail into piles. I walked into our bedroom twice and walked out twice without touching anything. My wife's scarf was still looped neatly over the back of her chair. I could not move it. By noon, I drove to the cafe. The Riverside Cafe sat near the small river that cut through town. It had metal chairs outside and crowded tables inside. My wife used to like sitting near the window, watching people walk their dogs. Now I was walking in alone. Margaret was already there, sitting at a small table near the back, away from the windows. She wore one of her usual bright scarves, trying to bring color into places that did not have it. She stood up when she saw me and hugged me tighter than I expected. She told me I looked tired. I said she did too. Well, that was true. Grief lives in faces in similar ways. We ordered coffee. For a while, we talked about my wife. Margaret told a story about when they were teenagers, how my wife had once dyed her hair a ridiculous shade of red and tried to hide it from their parents. We both smiled for a second, then the smiles faded. The past felt too close and too far at the same time. Eventually, the talk shifted the way it always does. Margaret asked if the estate office had contacted me. I said yes, the meeting was scheduled for tomorrow. She nodded, stirring her coffee even though she did not add anything to it. She said she had heard some things that bothered her. She hesitated before she spoke, which made me pay attention. She said that after the funeral, in the corner near the buffet, she had been standing with a couple of relatives when Brianna joined them. She told me Brianna had been talking confidently about next steps. Her words, not mine. Margaret said that Brianna had told the group not to worry. She said that once the inheritance was sorted, she would be running everything. There had been a small laugh when she said it, like it was a joke and not a statement. I listened, my hands wrapped around the hot mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. Margaret said she had tried to gently remind Brianna that I was still here, that I had been married to my wife for over 4 decades, that I was capable. She said Brianna smiled and answered that I was grieving and could not be expected to manage complicated matters. The way Margaret described it, there had been a tone in Brianna's voice, a tone like you would use when talking about an elderly neighbor who should not be driving anymore. I thanked Margaret for telling me. She said she wasn't sure if she should, but she thought I deserved to know. She added that she did not like how Brianna talked about me or about my wife's things, like they were pieces on a board. We finished our coffee in silence. On the drive home, my mind drifted backward through years without asking my permission. Back to a different hallway, with different smells, different chairs. I saw the hospital corridor where my wife spent most of her last months. She was in the oncology wing. The floor always smelled like disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. The vending machines at the end of the hall made a constant humming sound that never stopped. I visited every day. I knew the nurses by name. I knew which chair near the window squeaked and which one didn't. I knew the rhythm of the machines that monitored her heart. Trevor came when he could, with Brianna by his side. They always walked in with big takeaway coffees and expensive-looking bags. They hugged my wife and told her not to worry about anything. They always said those exact words. They told her that after she was gone, they would take care of me. Trevor promised that he would make sure I wasn't alone, that I would never have to worry about the future. I believed him. My wife did too. Once, when the doctor had just left and the room was quiet, my wife took my hand and held it tighter than usual. She said I had always been the practical one. She said that after she was gone, she wanted there to be peace in the family. She did not want fights over money or houses or anything she would leave behind. She squeezed my hand again and told me that family was more important than things. She made me promise that I would try to keep everyone together, that I would be patient with Trevor, that I would give Brianna the benefit of the doubt. I promised. Weeks later, when her condition got worse, she could barely talk. But one afternoon, Trevor and Brianna were there when a social worker came in to ask about plans. My wife, tired and pale, told the social worker that Trevor and Brianna would help with everything if she could not. She said she trusted them. I remember the way Brianna's eyes lit up at the word everything. At the time, I thought it was comfort. Now, sitting in my car outside my own house, I wondered if it had been something else for her. I met Brianna for the first time 5 years ago. Trevor brought her to a family dinner. She was sharp, confident, and always on her phone. She worked in some kind of planning firm, something with portfolios and strategies. She shook my hand firmly and told me it was nice to finally meet me. She said Trevor had told her I was very old school. Back then, I took that as a compliment. I had spent my life designing bridges and roads that stayed where they were supposed to. Old school usually meant things that lasted. Over time, small comments started to stack up. When I talked about my job before retirement, she would smile and say that engineering must have been simpler back then. When I gave Trevor some advice about his mortgage, She said kindly that she already had it handled and that financial products had changed a lot since my time. When they bought their house, I offered to help them fix some things. I pointed out a crack near the garage that could become a problem later. She laughed and said that modern construction codes were different and that I shouldn't worry about little imperfections. 2 years later, Trevor called me because the crack had become a leak. They asked me over like a consultant, but when I suggested calling a specific repair company I trusted, she looked it up on her phone and said she wasn't sure their online reviews were good enough. At family gatherings, she often answered questions directed to Trevor. If someone asked him about work, she would jump in and explain his projects. She liked being the one with information. She liked control. My wife saw some of this. She mentioned once that Brianna had a strong personality. She said that we should be patient, that younger people handled life differently. She believed Brianna would settle over time. I wanted to believe that too. I wanted to trust my son's choice in a partner, so I let things slide. A comment here, a dismissive look there. At the time, they felt small. When my wife's health started failing, those small moments changed shape. In the hospital, when doctors spoke about treatment options, they looked at me first, then at Trevor. Sometimes they looked at Brianna too, because she always had questions. She liked to take control of the conversation. After one long meeting about care plans, she pulled me aside in the hallway and told me that these decisions could be confusing. She offered to translate them for me later in simpler terms. I had spent my entire career reading complex technical reports and legal documents. I did not need translation, but I nodded. I was too tired to argue. In those months, Trevor leaned on Brianna for everything. He deferred to her when it came to scheduling, when it came to understanding insurance forms, when it came to talking to the staff. I watched my son disappear into the space behind her shoulder. At first, I was grateful he had someone strong beside him. Now, walking into my quiet living room after the cafe, I saw it differently. I sat down in my chair and looked at the framed photo of my wife on the bookshelf. It was the picture from our 40th anniversary party. She was in a blue dress, laughing at something I had just said. Trevor and Brianna stood in the background, a little out of focus. I realized that somewhere along the way, they had started treating me like part of the background too. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. I let my mind replay Margaret's words at the cafe. She told me that Brianna had said, clear as day, that once the inheritance was done, she expected to run the estate. The line was crossed on a Tuesday night. The sky was already dark when I pulled into Trevor and Brianna's driveway. She had insisted that we meet before the inheritance meeting. She said it was important to have some things settled first. Her text had used words like efficient and streamlined, the kind of words people use when they want something from you without saying it directly. Inside their house, everything looked perfect as always. The white counters, the neatly placed decorations, the spotless floor. It felt more like a show home than a place people actually lived. Brianna was in the kitchen, moving around quickly, making sure plates were arranged just right. Trevor sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, shoulders slumped. They were polite at first. Brianna asked how I was holding up. Trevor asked if I needed anything at the house. The questions felt like lines they had rehearsed. They did not really look at me when they asked them. After we finished eating, Brianna cleared the plates and came back with a folder. The folder was smooth and new, unlike the worn paper I usually kept at home. She placed it in the center of the table like it was the main course. Her smile looked professional, not warm. She said she and Trevor had been talking. She said they realized that my wife's passing changed many things. She said that it was now more important than ever to make sure decisions were made properly. She kept using that word. Then she explained her idea. She said that it would be best if I signed some simple papers giving them the right to handle all estate matters. She called it a practical step. She said it would help avoid confusion at the inheritance meeting. She added that it would make things easier for the estate office and for the lawyer. She claimed everyone would be relieved. Trevor sat next to her and nodded along. I asked her calmly what exactly these papers would do. I did not raise my voice. I just asked. She said they would allow her and Trevor to speak for me on financial and property decisions. She said that this was standard when someone my age was under stress. She used the phrase under stress instead of grieving, as if I was a technical problem. I asked her if she thought I could not speak for myself. She gave a small laugh and said it wasn't about that. She said it was about avoiding delays. She added that if every decision had to go through me, things might get stuck. She said that the house, the accounts, and anything my wife had in her name needed active management. She pointed out that I might not always be up for that. Then she made the mistake that changed everything. She said that my wife had probably not expected me to live alone for long. She said that women think ahead. She hinted that my wife would have wanted someone younger and more dynamic to step in and manage things when she was gone. She did not say it softly. She said it like she believed it. My chest went cold, but my mind went very clear. I looked at Trevor. He did not look back. He stared down at the table, jaw tight. He did not say a word in my defense. He did not tell Brianna that she had gone too far. I realized then that I was not just being pushed gently to the side, I was being erased. Brianna pushed the folder a little closer to me. She said a notary could come by in the morning. She said it would all be settled before the meeting. She added that, after that, I could relax and enjoy my time while they dealt with the serious matters. I told her, very quietly, that I would not be signing anything that night. I said I preferred to keep things as they were until after the official meeting. I said we would see what the lawyer and the estate office had to say. Her smile thinned. She said I was making things harder than they needed to be. She reminded me again that I was under a lot of pressure and might regret delaying. She hinted that the estate office might view me as difficult. Trevor finally spoke. He said that Brianna knew what she was doing. He said that I should trust her. He pointed out that she handled their finances very well. He added that I was going through a lot and should let them take over. He still would not meet my eyes. I did not argue. I simply repeated that I would not sign anything that night. The air in the room shifted. Brianna's voice cooled. She said I was, of course, free to do what I wanted, but she hoped I would not come to them later asking for help when things became too much. The way she said it made it clear she already viewed me as a problem to manage, not a person. When I left their house, I did not feel shaky. I did not feel like a man falling apart. I felt like a man who had just watched someone place their cards on the table. She had stopped pretending the plan was for my benefit. She had shown me exactly how she saw me. On the drive home, I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence and let my thoughts settle around a different memory. Years earlier, before my wife ever got sick, we had sat in a different office with our lawyer, Richard Lowell. It was after Trevor's wedding. My wife had insisted that we review our wills and some other documents. She said that life changed when children got married, and it was better to put things in order while everyone was calm. Richard had talked us through options. He had mentioned standard wills, but also other structures. He used the word trust several times. He said that there were ways to protect the surviving spouse if something happened to one of us. He also said, very gently, that sometimes children or in-laws made bad choices, and it was wise to think ahead. At the time, I remember saying that Trevor would never behave that way. My wife had smiled and agreed, but Richard knew people, and he had advised us not to rely on feelings alone. He suggested some extra protections. He talked about certain clauses that could keep control with the surviving spouse. He explained that it was possible to set conditions about respect, contact, and involvement. We had listened, we had signed what he recommended. I did not memorize the wording. I did not think I needed to. That memory came back to me now, stronger than before, as I pulled into my driveway. Inside my house, the air was cool and still. Shadows stretched across the floor. I went into the kitchen, but I did not make coffee this time. I walked straight through to the door that led to the garage. The garage smelled like old wood, oil, and dust. My workbench sat under the single small window, covered in tools and boxes. In the far corner stood a metal filing cabinet, dented on one side from the time Trevor backed into it with a bike when he was 12. I turned on the overhead light. It buzzed for a moment before settling into a dull glow. I opened the filing cabinet and started pulling out folders. Old tax returns, maintenance receipts, insurance policies. Every paper from the last few decades seemed to be in there, layered on top of each other. My late wife always said I kept too much. Now I was glad I did. As I sorted, I felt less like a grieving husband and more like the engineer I used to be. There was a problem to understand. There were facts to order. There was a structure hidden under the mess. After a while, I found the folder I had been half remembering. It was thicker than the others, with our names written on the front in my wife's neat handwriting. Under our names, in smaller letters, was the year. It was from the same year Trevor got married. I set the folder on the workbench. I did not open it yet. I just looked at it and let the memory of that day in Richard's office settle more firmly. My wife had been the one to push for it. She insisted that we put everything in order so that, if something happened to one of us, the other would not be at the mercy of anyone's moods. She had said clearly that she trusted me and I trusted her. The documents, she had said, were for everyone else. Standing in my garage now, hearing the faint tick of the cooling car engine, I realized how right she had been. I placed a few other folders beside it. One about the house, one about our savings, one related to a small piece of land just outside town that no one ever remembered we owned except the two of us. I did not need to read every page right then. I just needed to see that they existed. I needed to remember that my life was not a blank space for Brianna to fill. In that quiet space, surrounded by old tools and older paper, Something inside me clicked into a new position. It was not rage, it was resolve. Brianna wanted control. She wanted me to sign papers before the inheritance meeting so she could walk in already holding the reins. She thought I would be confused and grateful. She thought age and grief had made me slow. She misunderstood what age and grief can also do. They strip away illusions. I wiped my hands on an old rag and walked back into the house. My phone lay on the kitchen table where I had left it. The screen was dark, but I knew exactly whose number I needed. I sat down, picked up the phone, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I wanted. Richard Lowell. My thumb hovered over the call button for a second. Then I pressed it. Richard picked up on the second ring. He said my name and asked how I was holding up. His voice was the same as always, steady and practical. I told him the truth. I said I was tired. Then I said I needed to talk about the meeting tomorrow and about some things that had changed since my wife died. He went quiet for a moment, then said I should come by his office first thing in the morning. He said he had kept copies of all our old documents. He added that it would be good to review them together. He did not sound surprised that I was calling. That calmed me more than any soft words would have. I slept a little that night. Not well, but better than the nights right after the funeral. My dreams were full of paper and voices I could not quite hear. In the morning, I put on a clean shirt and the same dark jacket I had worn to the funeral. I drove to Richard's office downtown. The building was old brick with a small brass plaque by the door. I had walked through those doors before for happier reasons. The receptionist recognized me and gave me a sad smile. She said Richard was expecting me and told me to go right in. I knocked anyway before I entered his office. Richard stood up from behind his desk and shook my hand. He was a little grayer than the last time I had seen him, but his eyes were sharp. There were neat stacks of files on the desk, and my name sat on a small label on one of them. He told me to sit. Then he asked what was going on. I told him about the funeral reception. I told him about hearing Brianna announce that she expected to run everything. I told him about the dinner at their house, the folder she slid across the table, and the papers she wanted me to sign. I repeated the way she talked about my age, my grief, my so-called inability to manage my own affairs. Richard listened without interrupting. He wrote a few notes as I spoke. He did not look shocked. He looked like a man who had heard versions of this story more than once. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped a pen on the desk. He reminded me of that meeting years ago, after Trevor's wedding, when my wife had insisted we plan ahead. He reminded me of the choices we made then. He said we had actually done more planning than most people. He also said that my wife had been very clear about wanting me protected. He pulled the thick folder with our names on it closer and opened it. I saw my signature and my wife's on several pages. I saw dates and headings. The words blurred at first, but he walked me through them slowly. He showed me how things were structured. He pointed out where decision-making power sat. He explained that my wife and I had signed documents that did more than just divide property. He reminded me that we had agreed on certain conditions. He did not read them aloud, word for word, but he summarized enough to make my jaw tighten. He told me, in plain language, that I was not as vulnerable as Brianna believed. He said that unless I chose to hand power over, no one could simply take it. He also said that certain behavior could actually trigger protections that were already in place. I felt anger stir then, but it was not wild. It was clean. Richard asked if I had signed anything recently that gave Trevor or Brianna new authority. I told him no. I said I had refused to sign the papers she brought me. He nodded and said that was good. He asked if I had any messages or witnesses to what Brianna had been saying. I told him about Margaret at the cafe. I told him about the conversation I overheard at the reception. I mentioned that some of Brianna's comments had been made in front of other relatives. He seemed to file that information away in his head. He closed the folder and rested his hands on top of it. Then he told me that the meeting at the estate office would still go ahead. He said it might be useful, actually. He explained that sometimes showing people where they stand works better than arguing with them in private. He asked if I wanted him present at the meeting. I said yes. He told me to go to the bank next and confirm some details there, just to make sure everything in their system matched the documents in his office. He said it would be wise to check account access, titles, and any notes attached to them. He did not say why out loud, but I understood. Before I left, he put a couple of pages into a separate folder and slid it into his briefcase. He said not to worry about the details right now. He said he would bring what we needed to the meeting. On my way out, the receptionist told me she was sorry again for my loss. I thanked her and stepped out into the cold air. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that makes everything look like the color has been washed out. The bank was only a few blocks away. I parked and sat in the car for a moment, gathering myself. Then I went inside. The lobby was busy. people standing in small lines, the sound of printers and low voices blending together. I waited until a clerk at one of the desks was free and then told her I needed to review some accounts. I explained that my wife had passed recently and I wanted to make sure my information was up to date. She offered her condolences and asked for my ID. She typed my name into the computer and pulled up a screen. I watched her eyes move as she scanned whatever was in front of her. Her expression did not change. That made me feel oddly relieved. She confirmed that my name was attached to the primary accounts. She confirmed that nothing had been changed recently. She explained that some accounts were in the name of a trust rather than in just our personal names, and that the trust designated me in a specific way. She did not go into detail, but she pointed to the notes on the screen and said they matched what their legal department had on file. I asked if there had been any requests from anyone else to alter access or get information. She checked and said no. She added that such requests would need my written consent. I thanked her. As I left the desk, I glanced back and saw the words, "Trust Hale Family," on her screen before she clicked away. It was only a glimpse, but it was enough to remind me that Brianna's plans were built on assumptions, not facts. Back home, the house felt different, even though nothing had changed physically. The same shadows on the floor, the same photos on the wall, the same empty chair, but I was now aware of an invisible frame around all of it, something my wife and I had built with signatures and careful words. I spent the afternoon at the kitchen table, spreading some of my own papers out. I did not dig into the full legal language. That was Richard's job. Instead, I focused on basic things. Lists of accounts, keys, old letters from the bank, property tax notices. I made a simple list on a legal pad, just like I used to do when planning projects at work. It calmed me. It also reminded me that this life had not been handed to me. My wife and I had worked for it. We had planned, saved, and compromised. None of it belonged by default to anyone who simply spoke the loudest. Later in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Trevor. He wrote that he hoped I was doing okay. Then he added that tomorrow was a big day and that he knew it might be emotional for me. He said that Brianna had prepared a clear plan to present at the inheritance meeting. He asked me to please try not to complicate things. He ended with a line about trusting them to handle the future. I read the message twice. Then I put the phone face down on the table and stared at the list I had made. Trust used to be a simple word. It meant something you felt. Somewhere along the way, I had learned that in some situations, it needed to be written down, too. Evening came, and with it, more quiet. I made myself a simple dinner and ate it in front of the TV with the sound off. My eyes kept drifting to the framed photo on the bookshelf. My wife's smile did not change, but it looked different to me now. It looked like the smile of someone who had known this day might come. As the light faded, my phone lit up again. This time it was an email from the estate office. It confirmed the time of the meeting and listed the attendees. My name, Trevor's name, Brianna's name, Margaret's name, a few other relatives. At the bottom, it said, "Legal Representative, Richard Lowell." There was also a note stating that, at the request of certain family members, an extended portion of the meeting would be reserved for discussion on future management of assets. I did not have to guess who had requested that. I closed the email but could still see the words in my mind. Future management of assets. It sounded cold. It sounded like someone planning to move pieces on a board while the board's original owner was still sitting there. I stood up and walked to the doorway of the garage. I did not turn on the light this time. I just looked at the shadowy outline of the filing cabinet and the workbench beyond it. It was enough to remind me that I was not walking into that meeting empty-handed. Later, as I got ready for bed, I laid out my clothes for the morning. Dark jacket, pressed shirt, polished shoes. It felt odd to dress for a fight that would not involve raised voices or fists, only words and paper. Before turning off the bedside lamp, I picked up my phone again. The calendar app showed a bright block of color across the next morning. Inheritance meeting, 10 a.m., location, Hale Family Estate Office. I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone down. In the quiet, with only the clock ticking in the hallway, I could almost hear my wife's voice in my head, telling me to stay calm, to think clearly, to remember what we had put in place together. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was the calendar reminder still glowing faintly on the screen. I woke up before my alarm. For a few seconds I had that strange, soft feeling where you do not remember what day it is. Then the weight came back. The meeting, the estate, Brianna's face in my mind, full of confidence, telling people she would run everything. The house was quiet, as always now. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the ticking clock in the hallway. It sounded slower today, like it knew what was coming. I showered, shaved carefully, and dressed in the clothes I had laid out the night before. Shirt pressed, jacket brushed, shoes clean. Standing in front of the mirror, I saw the lines on my face, the gray in my hair, the tired eyes. I also saw something else there, a steady line that had not been there during the early weeks after my wife died. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. This time, I took only one mug from the cabinet and put the other one back without thinking too hard about it. I drank the coffee slowly at the table, looking at the list of accounts and notes I had made the day before. It was neat and clear, my handwriting straighter than usual. My phone buzzed midway through the cup. A message from Trevor. He wrote that he and Brianna were on their way to the estate office. He said they would be there early to get everything set up. He added that he hoped I would keep an open mind and not make things harder than they needed to be. There was a line about respecting Mom's wishes and letting them help. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not say he was nervous. He wrote like someone already sure of the outcome. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. Before I left the house, I walked into the living room and stood in front of the bookshelf. I looked at the framed photo of my wife again. I spoke out loud this time, though my voice was low. I told her that I was going to the meeting. I told her that I remembered the day in Richard's office years ago. I told her I understood why she had insisted on those extra steps. I promised that I would not let someone rewrite what we built together. Talking to a picture might sound foolish to some people. It helped me steady my hands. Outside, the air was crisp. I locked the front door and felt the key turn with a familiar weight. The old car started on the first try. On the drive into town, I did not turn on the radio. I wanted to hear my own thoughts. Richard had asked me to stop by his office before heading to the estate. I arrived 10 minutes early. The receptionist gave me a small nod and gestured toward the open door. Richard was already standing by his desk, jacket on, briefcase at his side. He looked like he was heading into any other normal business meeting, but I saw the way his eyes sharpened when he saw me. He asked if I had slept. I said enough. He did not ask follow-up questions. He just nodded and came around the desk. He told me that he had reviewed everything again the night before. He said he had also double-checked some notes with the bank's legal department. He sounded satisfied, not anxious. That eased something in my chest. He took out a couple of sheets of paper and laid them on the desk, turning them so they faced me. The pages were not thick stacks, not like a full contract, more like short additions. The print was small and formal. I did not try to read every line. I trusted him. My wife had trusted him. He pointed to a couple of spots and explained in simple terms that these were confirmations. He said that nothing here created something new. It simply reaffirmed decisions already made. It made sure there was no confusion about who held certain rights. He added that it would also make some future choices clearer if I decided to change anything later. He did not describe exact clauses. He did not read out legal phrases. He just looked me in the eyes and asked if this matched what my wife and I had wanted back then. I thought of the hospital hallway. I thought of her telling me she wanted peace, not chaos. I thought of the way she squeezed my hand when she made me promise to protect what we had built. I picked up the pen he offered and signed where he indicated. My hand did not shake. When I was done, he gathered the pages, slid them into a folder, and placed that folder carefully into his briefcase. He locked the briefcase with a small click. The sound was soft, but it felt final. He then told me something else. In his calm voice, he explained that meetings like the one we were about to attend often followed a pattern. One side came in expecting to control the room. They talked first, loudly, and tried to set the tone. He said our job was not to shout back, but to let them reveal themselves. He said that we would wait, we would listen, and then, when the time came, we would simply put the facts on the table. He asked me if I was ready for that. I surprised myself when I said yes without hesitation. As we walked out of his office together, he put a hand briefly on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel less alone. Outside on the street, the city was busy in its usual way. People rushing to work, traffic lights changing, a truck backing up with a long beep. None of them knew that, a few blocks away, my family was about to try to move me out of the way of my own life. We drove separately to the estate office. The building was on the edge of downtown, a low, glass-fronted place with a neat sign out front. I had been there once years ago when my wife and I first signed some documents. It had felt like a simple errand then. Today, the parking lot looked like a stage. I pulled into a space and turned off the engine. There were already several cars parked. I recognized Trevor's silver sedan and Brianna's dark SUV. Margaret's old station wagon was there too. Another couple of cars I did not know belonged to our extended relatives. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the main doors. Through the glass, I could see a reception desk and a hallway beyond it. People moved in and out, carrying folders and talking in low voices. My phone buzzed again, a new message from Trevor. He wrote that they were already inside and had reserved the main conference room. He said that some of the family members were curious and that he had told them Brianna would explain the plan. There was a line about hoping I would not cause a scene. I did not answer. I set the phone down on the passenger seat, face down. Richard parked a minute later and walked over to my car. He greeted me with a small nod and asked if I was ready. I said yes again, and this time I felt it even more. We walked toward the entrance together. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. The air inside was cooler than outside, with that familiar smell of carpet cleaner and printed paper. The receptionist glanced up and smiled politely. She checked a list on her screen and told us the conference room number. She added that the rest of our party was already there. There was a slight emphasis on already, like she had noticed the tone in the room when they arrived. Richard thanked her and led the way down the hallway. Our footsteps sounded too loud on the carpet. As we approached the conference room, I could hear faint voices through the closed door. One of them was Brianna's. We stopped a few steps short of the door. Richard looked at me and asked quietly if I wanted a moment. I thought about it. I shook my head. If I waited any longer, they would only talk more. Before we went in, Margaret stepped out of a nearby restroom and saw us. Her eyes widened a little and she hurried over. She leaned in and hugged me quickly, like she was not sure if she was allowed to. She whispered that the atmosphere in the room was tense. She said that Brianna had been speaking for most of the time since they got there. She had laid out charts and some kind of proposal. Margaret rolled her eyes slightly when she used that word. She added, in a lower voice, that a couple of the relatives seemed impressed, but others looked uncomfortable. She said that Trevor had barely spoken. He just kept nodding along with whatever Brianna said. I asked her if anyone had asked how I felt about all of this. She made a face and said no. She said the talk had mostly been about what to do with things and how to move forward efficiently. She said the word efficiently with obvious disgust. Richard listened without commenting. His face did not change, but I saw his hand tighten slightly on the handle of his briefcase. Margaret took a breath and then said something else. She said that, at one point, Brianna had mentioned that, for everyone's sake, it would be better if I did not have to deal with the details. She had described me as fragile and overwhelmed. Margaret said she almost spoke up, but stopped when she saw a couple of relatives glance at each other. She looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and anger. She said she was sorry. I told her it was all right. It wasn't, of course, but I understood that none of this was her doing. Richard gently suggested that Margaret head back into the room first. He said it would be better if we entered after everyone was settled. She nodded and squeezed my arm before going back down the hall. When she opened the conference room door, the voices inside grew louder for a second before the door swung shut again. The hallway was suddenly very quiet. Richard turned to me one more time. He told me to remember that I did not have to convince anyone of anything. He said that facts were facts, no matter how much noise was in the room. He reminded me that we were not there to argue about feelings. We were there to clarify reality. I took a slow breath and let it out. For a brief moment, I thought of turning around, of leaving them to whatever scheme they had built. I could have walked away and let them fight over illusions. But then I saw my wife's face in my mind again. The hospital room, her hand in mine. Her asking for peace, not erasure. Walking away would not honor that. I straightened my shoulders. My hand brushed against the side of my jacket where my own small notes were folded in the inside pocket. They were simple, but they reminded me of what mattered. Richard reached for the conference room door handle. For a second, he looked at me as if giving me one last chance to hesitate. I did not. He pushed the handle down and opened the door. I stepped into the room, feeling every pair of eyes turn toward me as the door swung shut behind us with a soft but final click. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the conference room was the table. It was long, shiny, and already covered in paper and coffee cups that were not mine. At one end, near the big screen on the wall, Brianna sat with her laptop open and a neat stack of color-coded folders on either side. Trevor sat just to her right, shoulders hunched, eyes moving between her and the table. The rest of the family filled the chairs along the sides. Margaret was near the middle, lips pressed together. Everyone turned when Richard and I walked in. Some faces looked relieved, others looked curious. Brianna's mouth curled into what she probably meant as a welcoming smile, but her eyes narrowed when she saw Richard's briefcase. One of the estate staff members, a woman in a dark blazer, stood up and greeted us. She said she was there to facilitate the meeting. She gestured for me to sit at the opposite end of the table from Brianna. She placed Richard's chair beside mine. There was an awkward silence as we took our seats. I could feel people watching me, waiting to see if I looked fragile, unstable, or anything else that matched the story they had been told. The staff woman started the meeting. She said why we were there. She spoke about my wife's passing and the need to review her estate and the existing documents. She used calm, neutral language. She said that the first part of the meeting would focus on what was already in place. The second part would allow the family to discuss future plans. She glanced around the table and asked if that sounded acceptable. Brianna answered first. She said it sounded fine, and added that she already had a proposal prepared to help everyone move forward efficiently. She said she would be happy to present it after the basic review. A couple of relatives nodded. Others looked unsure. The staff woman looked at me next. She asked if I was comfortable proceeding on that basis. I said I was. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Richard sat with his hands folded on the table, briefcase at his feet. He said very little. He simply confirmed that he represented me and that he had all relevant documents ready to review. The staff woman opened a file and began outlining what the records showed. She said that my wife and I had set up a family trust some years back. She explained in simple terms how it worked, that certain assets were held in it, that designated people had rights, that there were conditions attached. She said that the documents on file made things clear. I watched Brianna's expression carefully. At first, she looked calm, as if this was all going according to schedule. When the staff woman mentioned the trust, though, I saw a small crease appear between her eyebrows. The woman then asked if our legal representative wanted to add anything regarding the structure. Richard finally moved. He slid a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table in front of him. He said that the trust was not only still in effect, but had been updated within the existing rules shortly after my wife's passing. He said the updates had been signed and registered properly. He added that they did not change the basic purpose of the trust, only clarified certain points. Brianna asked what that meant. Her voice was polite, but the edge was there. Richard did not answer her directly. Instead, he addressed the room. He summarized the key points in simple language. He said that the trust had always been designed first and foremost to protect the surviving spouse. That meant me. He explained that, under the structure my wife and I agreed to, control of the trust and its assets passed entirely to me on her death. Unless I chose in writing to share or give it up, he paused. No one spoke. Then he said that, as of that morning, I had chosen not to give up any control. He explained that my position as trustee was confirmed and that no one else at the table had legal authority to make decisions about the assets held in the trust without my agreement. He said that included the house, the savings, and the piece of land outside town that most people had forgotten about. Brianna shifted in her chair. She said that, of course, no one wanted to take anything from me. She said her idea was simply to help manage things so I wouldn't have to worry. She added that she had prepared a detailed plan that showed how she and Trevor could handle decisions on my behalf with my best interests in mind. Richard nodded once and asked if her plan involved legal instruments giving them decision-making power. She said that it did, and mentioned the papers she had wanted me to sign the night before. Several relatives looked over at me then, surprised. Richard calmly explained that I had declined to sign those papers. He also explained that, given the terms of the trust, even if I had signed something informal, it would not override what was already in place unless it followed specific procedures. He said those procedures had not been followed. Trevor finally spoke. He said that they thought the trust was more of a formality, something old that could be adjusted easily. He said they assumed the inheritance meeting was where everyone would agree to changes. Richard shook his head slightly. He said that assumptions did not change legal reality. Then he said there was another aspect of the trust everyone should be aware of. He opened another part of the folder and spoke slowly. He explained that, when the trust was created, my wife had insisted on including a special condition. He called it a conduct clause. It stated that if any beneficiary or connected person took actions to undermine, exclude, or publicly disrespect the surviving spouse in the context of family or estate matters, certain rights could be reduced or removed at the trustee's discretion. He did not look at Brianna when he said it, but everyone else did. He went on. He explained that in the days since my wife's passing, there had been several statements made that could be seen as attempts to push me aside. He said these had been witnessed by family members and reported to us. He also mentioned that efforts had been made to get me to sign away control before today's meeting. He paused again and said that, after reviewing all of this carefully, I had exercised my rights under that clause earlier that morning. He explained what that meant in practice. He said that my son, Trevor, was still a beneficiary under the trust, but his access now took a different form. He would not receive direct control over any assets. Instead, any distributions to him would be made at my discretion while I was alive, and certain inheritances would only be unlocked under specific conditions laid out in the documents. Then he said something that made the room go completely silent. He explained that spouses of beneficiaries were explicitly excluded from any decision-making role and from any direct claim to assets held in the trust. He clarified that this meant Brianna had no legal standing to manage, direct, or claim any part of the estate, now or in the future, unless I personally chose to involve her. Brianna's face went pale. She said there must be some mistake, that my wife would never have agreed to that. She said that my wife trusted her. She pointed out that her name was in some of the hospital notes, listed as a contact. Richard replied that my wife had been very clear in the recorded instructions attached to the trust. He said she had named Trevor as someone she loved and wanted to support, but she had also requested that control stay away from outside influence if conflict ever arose. He said the documents reflected that. Margaret spoke then. She said, in a tight voice, that she remembered the conversation in the hospital where my wife asked for peace and said she did not want anyone pushing Martin aside. She said this in front of everyone. Her words landed like small stones on an already heavy pile. Trevor looked between Brianna, me, and Richard. He asked quietly what this meant for him now. He sounded less sure than I had ever heard him. Richard answered plainly. He said it meant that nothing was being taken from Trevor today. He still had a future under the trust, but he would not be running anything. He would not be using my home or my assets as a stage for someone else's plans, and any change to that would depend on how things went from here. The estate staff woman cleared her throat and asked if, given this clarification, there was still a need to hear Brianna's proposal for future management. Her tone was neutral, but there was a hint of something underneath. Maybe that was my imagination. No one rushed to answer. Brianna said that it was obvious the meeting had been turned into an ambush. She said that I had allowed myself to be manipulated by old documents and a lawyer. She said that this was unfair to her and to Trevor. She said that the family should consider whether this was really what my wife would have wanted. I finally spoke. I told the room that my wife had sat with me and Richard when we set this up. I said she knew exactly what she wanted, and she trusted me to follow through. I said that what she would not have wanted was to be used as a line in someone else's script to take over our life's work. I did not raise my voice. I did not look angry. I just spoke the truth as clearly as I could. No one responded right away. A couple of relatives shifted in their seats. Margaret looked straight at Brianna with an expression I had never seen from her before, hard and cold. The estate staff woman checked her notes and said that, from their perspective, the situation was now clear. She said the trust documents and updates would stand as the controlling record. She added that any proposals not aligned with that would not be processed by their office. She asked if there were any remaining questions about who held legal authority over the estate. No one spoke. Richard closed his folder and put it back into his briefcase. He said that, unless there were further formal matters to address, I was prepared to end the meeting. No one objected. Chairs scraped against the floor as people slowly stood up. The room suddenly felt smaller. A couple of relatives came over to touch my arm or nod in my direction. They did not say much. They did not have to. Trevor stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the table. Then he got up and took a half-step toward me, as if he might say something. Brianna put a hand on his arm and whispered something I could not hear. He stopped. I did not wait for more. I picked up my notes, watched Richard lift his briefcase, and walked toward the door. The room fell quiet as I moved. The only sound was the soft thud of my shoes on the carpet and the faint rustle of paper behind me. I opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and felt the cool air of the building wrap around me as it clicked shut at my back.